So I did 3 years on the anti-terrorist branch, and then I decided I wanted to go for promotion. Mostly because I I had a sergeant who I hated. I was like, he drove me to the point where I can't work for you anymore. I need to get promoted, so I don't have to work for idiots like you anymore. So he was inspirational in my career, but probably not for the right reasons. So I put him for promotion, and I got it to be promoted to detective sergeant, and I left that unit to go and do that job because you didn't get promoted in house. And I went to the East London, to Tower Hamlets, sort of Whitechapel area, and I did 3 years there. I did sort of a split between robbery and rape. So did that for about 18 months of robbery, about 18 months of the rape unit, and then decided after 3 years of that the one thing I haven't done is murder. And so the applications come out for murder. So I put in for it. I didn't get it first time, actually. First time I went for it, I didn't interview very well, so I got knocked back. And then the next time I did it, I did. And so I joined there with about 18 years service, it would have been, and basically never left. And because whenever I say this, I always say the same thing. It sounds really corny, but I found my calling. Once I started investigating murders, and the first time I took one to court, and I had that moment where the jury come back of guilty, I thought, I can't. And dealing with a family and the satisfaction you get from seeing justice for them, and I thought, I can't do anything else. I mean, even though I'd done most serious crime, this for me was like, this was the best feeling I'd had in the police, was getting that case to court as a case officer, as a DS case officer, because it's the DSs that take the cases to court. And having had that experience, I thought, that's it. I never left. And even though I got promoted, I think I left for 6 months or so to do a shootings team. But as soon as I could, I was back on the murder team. So I ended up doing 12 years on the murder team. And it was just the best job. I loved it. And since leaving the police, all I ever talk about now is murder. It's like, it's defined my life. That decision to go on a murder team has defined my career. Because when I look back at my career and you think, well, what were you? What did I do? What would I consider myself? I was a murder detective. And even though it was only just over a third of my career, to me it defined my career. And it's defined everything that I've done since.
And you said that in your book, you said you enjoyed the DS role the most, and you had to really think about going up to DI because you liked what that entailed.
Yeah, so I made a conscious decision in my career that I liked. I don't do it anymore. I liked police work. I liked interviewing people, arresting people, chasing people, doing all the exciting things that is what we would consider police work. Now, could I have got promoted? I retired as a DI. Could I have got promoted above there? Undoubtedly, I could. If I put my mind to it early on, undoubtedly I could have gone up higher. No regrets whatsoever, because it meant that for the longest period possible, I was doing that police work. And when I got promoted to DI, I still enjoyed it, but it wasn't that hands-on that I like sitting there and looking at a murderer in the eye, knowing when you lay hands on them and you arrest them, you've got them. Because when you become on a murder team, the DI and DCI, in the county forces, it might be superintendent, because they do that as well. It's all strategic. It's about where is this investigation going to go? We'll make that decision about where up here, where we're going with it, which is good and it's interesting. But for me, it was always about that hands-on, down and getting dirty. Do you know what I mean? And having a witness that didn't want to speak to you and turning them, and knowing that was what changed the investigation. That the investigation literally spun on what that witness has told you, or the phone. I used to love doing phone work, and the phone work solving the murder case, and that to me was the buzz I used to get, knowing that I was directly responsible for that turning point in that murder case. Now, don't get me wrong, the DI and the DCIs, they have an influence. They do decide the direction, and that can influence whether or not a murder case is solved. But to me, it wasn't what I enjoyed. Sitting in your office writing strategies for 8 hours a day does not compare to getting hands on to a murderer and look him in the eye and really getting down and involved in finding the evidence that's going to convict him. To me, that was what gave me the buzz. Sitting in court, taking it to court, knowing that it was my job to pull that evidence together. So it really did fall on me whether a job was if I didn't get my job right, we weren't going to get a conviction. And that I like that pressure. So yeah, and that's why I didn't go for promotion earlier. Look, can I be honest with you, Dawn? The reason why I went for promotion is that it bumped up my pension. Oh, look, I've said it. I've put it out there. The way my police pension worked was it was 2/3 of your final salary. And years ago, they did away with overtime for inspectors and they bunged it on their salary instead, which made a huge difference between sergeant and inspector for your pension. Huge difference. And I was mercenary, and we in the police they call it a dash for cash. You're trying to get promoted at the end, and that's what I did. And look, I said it. Please, listeners, don't judge me. But that's why I went for inspector in the end. Not for professional reasons, but for monetary ones.
How long were you a DI for?
I was a DI for 4 years.
Was that compulsory, or were you all right doing it that long, or did you have to do it for that length of time before you would get the pension?
Right, this is going to sound really bad. Right? So when you get promoted, you start off on a lower pay scale, and you go up each year. And for inspectors, there are 3. So for me to get the maximum pension, I had to get promoted 4 years earlier, because your pension's measured on your last year's salary. I feel really bad saying this out loud, and everyone's going to judge me. Look, I'm still doing good work. I'm still investigating murders, and I'm still doing the same job to an extent, but just from a different angle. Look, everyone's gonna think I was just in it for the money. I wasn't.
You decided you were going to retire after the 30 years. Was that all you get to do in the police, or was that your decision? Prided. Oh no, I've got to be English right. I prided myself at the time on the fact that I gave my all, and I did give, in terms of the hours that I spent at work, the time I didn't spend. I've got a second family now, but with my first family, the time I didn't spend with them, I missed children's birthday parties, missed social events, missed that other, and I did so willingly, and I knew that I was committing myself to my career, and I decided I was going to investigate the most serious crime, and for the sake of the people that I was investigating for, the victims, I couldn't have done that job if I was doing it half-heartedly. I had to give everything. But by the end of my career, I was psychologically, I knew that I was working towards that point, and it allowed me to give my all. If for some reason then they said to me, right, you've got to do another 5 years, I think I would have taken the wind out of my sails. I would have struggled, I think, to give the same commitment. And I think you can only do it for so long before you become jaded by it. So if someone said to me, you have to do another 5 years, I don't know if I could have given the same commitment as I did before. When you were a DS in the murders team and you were out and about doing things, what did you have with you? What did you carry with you, as opposed to when you were just out in the street?
I was really bad. I never wore my vest. You know, it's almost compulsory that you wear a stab vest. I never had it. I think I lost it at some point and didn't get replaced for about 4 years. I literally would go arresting people that have shot someone, and all I would have on me is a pen. Literally. Whether I was naive, blasé, stupid, or whatever it was, I always felt the way I would arrest people is I wouldn't go steaming through their windows at 3 o'clock in the morning. I would
knock on their door at a reasonable hour, come at them with my smiley face, treat them with respect, not suddenly put them in a situation where they were fight or flight. And as I said earlier on, I got assaulted once in my career, and I arrested dozens of murderers. I remember there was this one time. What used to annoy me was when other people got involved and took that decision out of my hand. Like I would be like, it's my decision. Like health and safety would probably have a field day with me if something did go wrong, but it was how I worked, and the people I worked with were comfortable with that. When other people got involved, and so, like, I mentioned earlier, I went for 6 months and dealt with a shootings team. Every single one of their arrests were done with firearms officers, and it used to frustrate the hell out of me because it'd be like, well, we know he's in there. Why don't we just go and knock on the door? Oh no, well, we need. It'd be like, oh, we can't do that. There's a firearm involved. Well, look, if that firearm had murdered someone and killed someone, it'd be someone like me just knocking on the door and saying, hello, mate, we're arresting you. But because a fella didn't die, that's what this team dealt with, just shootings that were non-fatal. Perversely, if they didn't die, they would get arrested by a team of people that look like RoboCop. So how does that work? How does that work? It's like, there was one occasion, it was like, he's in a social, we know he's inside this social club. Well, let's go and arrest him. I know we can't. Well, why not? What's he going to do? He's going to shoot up the place. It doesn't work like that. It's not. Right. So again, maybe I was naive or just luck or whatever it was. When I arrested people, they could have committed the most heinous of crimes, but that was then. Now they're in a situation where they're dealing with a police officer in a situation that they've not been put in fight or flight. Someone's talking to them calmly. In my experience, and maybe I was just lucky, they didn't suddenly go, well, I've got to fight my way out of this situation. They'd be like, oh. And you'd see often you'd see the resignation come over their face, not fear, not anger. Whereas 3 o'clock in the morning, they're getting woken up with a gun being poked in their face. They're more likely to, what's going on? They're suddenly, so yeah, it worked for me. And as I say, yeah, my protective equipment generally was a pen. Which can be very dangerous if used in the right way. The pen is mightier than the sword, as they say. The pen is mightier than an aspen CS spray. That was my motto.
You're just trouble, weren't you? So what happened that you had to move or come off the road, as you call it?
Well, I'm going to have to go back to the beginning of when I first started for this part. Back when my wife and I got married in 92, I had just started with the job. And I think it was a week after we had gotten married, I had become very sick. And I didn't know what the deal was at the time. I remember I had the stomach ache, and all I remember is being at home and I'm trying to think back. No, I remember I had a stomach ache, and it lasted for about a week. I was working afternoons at the time. And I remember coming home and I told my wife that I couldn't take the pain anymore. So we ended up going to the ER. And now this was back in 92, 93. And while we're at the ER, a fight breaks out. And I'm in the middle of this fight and I'm throwing up and everything. And once I finally did get a chance to go back to see the doctor, they told me I had gas, go home and drink some prune juice and I'll be fine. Well, about 3 days later, I was being rushed to the hospital. And they didn't know what was wrong. I just looked like I was 9 months pregnant. And they ended up doing exploratory surgery. And when they cut me open, they discovered that gangrene was in 3 feet of my intestines. My bowel had died. And that was the stomach ache that I was experiencing throughout that week. So I ended up being in the hospital. I think it was like a month and a half or something. And everything was fine. I ended up going back to work sometime later. And fast forward to 2008, my family and I, we were on vacation down in Florida. And I'm loading up the car. And by the time I was done, I was just dripping in sweat. My wife, she's a nurse, and she thought I was having a heart attack. But I remember I was short of breath. and everything. And, we flew back home. I didn't think it was a big deal. I actually thought I had bronchitis, to be honest. So we flew back home, and I went to work the next night. And while I was at work, I had this pain in my leg that was just killing me, and I didn't know what it was. So I ended up taking just a ton of Motrin just to make it through the night. And the next day or a couple of days later, I ended up going to see my doctor because I thought I had bronchitis. And when I got to the doctor's office, I mentioned to him about my leg, and he looks at my leg and he says, oh, you have a blood clot, surface blood clot, which by itself was no big deal. And when he said that to me, I said, it's funny because my sister was just diagnosed with the blood clot a couple of months ago. So the doctor says, just to be safe, I'm going to send you down for an ultrasound. And I go down, I'm laying on the table, and the technician is starting her process, and we're, just small talk. And right in the middle of her doing her thing, she says, uh-oh. And I'm like, uh-oh, what?
I don't want to hear that.
And she says, I'm sorry, Mr. McNeil, that slipped out. She goes, but have you been short of breath? And I said, yes. And she says, we got to get you to the ER right now. You have the largest blood clots I've ever seen. And turns out I had blood clots in both legs that went from my hips down below my knees, and a 5-inch piece that broke off and entered my lungs. And that was, like I said, in 2008. And it was, I had never heard of a saddle embolus, which is what it was. And, I remember being in the hospital, and I look it up, and the first thing that I come across is a picture of a gentleman that had died from a PE. And and his blood clot was like a half an inch long, and mine was 5 inches long. So I didn't think I was going to make it through the night, and I'm still here. But I going back to 92 when I first got sick. I remember, and my wife didn't tell me this until sometime later, but they didn't expect me to make it through the night when I first got sick. And my wife told me, I think they said I had like a 10% chance of making it through the night. But again, I'm still here. But, going back to 2008, as a result of the blood clotting, I was put on blood thinners for the rest of my life. And because of that, the doctor strongly suggested that I get off the road because, heaven forbid, I got shot or stabbed or something, I stand a risk of bleeding out. So I end up having to go in and work the front desk, which I end up doing for the last 5 years of my career. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. One, because I was kind of forced into a position that I didn't want to be in, and I had to stop doing something that I really enjoyed. But more importantly, working the desk is totally different than working like the road, because people don't see you as a police officer for some reason. You're wearing the same uniform and everything, but they look at you as a secretary or something, and they come in and they think that they can treat you any kind of way. And I think I had more arguments on that desk than I did on the road. But I really didn't enjoy it. It was just an unpleasant experience while I was up there. It changed me as a person. I became very mean and nasty, and I was to the point where I actually hated people. And I'll never forget one day, it was a Sunday, and Sunday was usually my slow day. So I said to myself, I'm going to go in and turn over a new leaf and everything. And I'm going to try to remain calm and not argue with anybody. And I think that lasted about 10 minutes. So, yes, some guy comes in and he's just ranting and raving and screaming and carrying on. And he and I get into it, and he goes on about his business. Well, I'm still sitting there fuming. And about a half hour later, this lady comes in and she says, she was just coming in. She was unrelated to that knucklehead, but she wanted to make a accident report. And I looked up at her and I said, "Can I help you?" And she looks at me and she says, "Well, I was coming to make an accident report, but you just looked at me like, what the F do you want?" And that was probably the look that I had on my face, because I was still pissed off about dealing with this last clown. So it was just that type of things. I absolutely hated working the desk, but it's funny. I look back at when I got sick and I made it through that. And, one other story here. I end up, I didn't want to, it was a Sunday. I didn't want to go to work that day. And I was about to get dressed. And I remember telling my wife, I don't think I'm going in today. Just out of the blue, I just decided not to go in. It was like maybe a couple of hours before my shift was about to start. And I'm at home and my phone rings. And it was one of my coworkers that worked the desk with me. And he's yelling on the phone at me, calling me all kind of MFs. I'm like, what's the problem? He goes, turn on the news. So I turned on the TV. Apparently, a gentleman had walked in that had terminal cancer, and he wanted to commit suicide by cop. And he pulls out a gun there at the desk, and they had a shootout at the front desk. And one officer ended up getting shot. He got shot in the shoulder, but he was fine, and they ended up killing the gentleman. And I just thank God, because I would have been there had I not called. I just out of the blue, I just decided to call in,
That's
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
You must have had a guardian angel that day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I've been lucky with that, because that was like the third time that, something like that has happened. But, everything happens for a reason. And as much as I hated working the desk, it wasn't until the last day that I realized while I was put in that position. About a year or so, about 8 months or so before I was due to retire, a lady comes in with her mother and her 12-year-old son. And she's upset and she's yelling and screaming. And she says, I'm leaving him here. I can't control him. He's disrespectful. He hits me. He hits my mom, and so on and so forth. And I was having a bad day that day. So I was not up for any nonsense. So I take this young man aside and I looked at him and I said, go ahead, hit me. And he looks at me and he clenches his fist and he starts crying. And I just got in his face and I said, what are you crying for? You were a man when you was punching on your mother and your grandmother. Now you got a man in your face. Go ahead, take one swing and I'm going to wear your butt out. And he didn't hit me, but he and I ended up having a long conversation for about 30, 40 minutes. And the last thing I said to him was, look, I don't know you. You don't know me. But if I get an inkling that you put your hand on another human being, I will personally track you down and beat your behind. And that was the last I saw of him until the day I retired. And they were having a going away party for me at the station. And I get called up to the front desk. And when I go up there, it was his mom. And she says, Officer McNeil, do you remember me? And I said, yes, of course. How can I help you? And she says, I wanted to come in. I heard today was your last day, and I just wanted to say thank you. And I'm like, for what? And she says, ever since that day you spoke to my son, he's been a different child. And I just wanted to give you a hug and say thank you. And it was at that moment I realized why everything that I had gone through with my health, why I was put in that position, was for that moment when that young kid came through that door. Because, like I said, had it been anybody else, they may not have taken the time to talk to him the way that I spoke with him. And who knows what might have come out of the situation with him. So, that kind of, I don't want to say it made me feel better about the desk, because I still hated the desk, but it kind of put things in perspective. And I remember after I retired, my kids came to me and they said, it was about 6, 7 months later, and they said, my whole attitude had changed for the better.
They got their dad back again.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but the desk it's just not a fun place to work if you're a police officer.
Do some people choose to work there though, or is it always if you have to come off the road? Is that who you tend to find?
Yeah, there's some people that choose to work it. Very few. Very few choose to work it, but there are those that enjoy it. Or I shouldn't say enjoy it, but put up with it simply because they don't want to work the road. Usually it's a spot for older guys, guys that, have put in their time on the road and things like that. And back in the day, working the desk, it was an easy job. But as time went on, it became society changed, and like I say, people just didn't view you as a police officer. And I cannot, and probably the worst thing that I ever dealt with on the front desk were custody exchanges. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here in America, if a husband and wife have broken up and gotten divorced and they have kids and they share custody, a lot of times they will meet at a police station to exchange the kids on their week to have the kids, or their weekend, or whatever it is. And I cannot tell you the number of times people can't just come in, say what they have to say, pass the kids off, and go about their business. It always has to lead to an argument. And it was to the point with some people where I just told them, don't come back. You can't do your you can't do your exchanges here anymore because it's just ridiculous. I had one couple, the lady came in, the husband comes in, they have 2 little kids. I don't remember their age, but they were very young, under 10. The husband wanted to go upstairs and get a copy of a police report that he had filed against her a few weeks earlier, and he wanted to take the kids with him. So she comes in and she says, "Where is he going with my kids?" I said, "He's going upstairs to get his police report, ma'am. He's not going, he's just going upstairs." She falls on the floor. She's screaming. She's crying. "He's taking my kids." And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh no, I couldn't be doing with that.
Yeah. So she runs up the stairs. So I have to run up the stairs behind her. They're up there arguing. He's on the phone with his attorney, and he says something to me, and he and I end up getting into it. And he puts his attorney on speakerphone, and his attorney, "Are you threatening my client?" I said, "No, it's not a threat. It's a promise. If he don't get his ass out of here, I'm going to lock him up." So that's kind of how it went with custody exchanges,
Oh, I'm not sure. I've never heard of them doing that here, but I'll need to ask now.
Yeah. It's something that should take 30 seconds. Usually turns into just aggravation. And I mean, there was one guy, just to be a jerk, he would bring his new girlfriend in with him. I'm like, why she can't just wait in the car?
Asking.
Why she can't just wait in the car? You know, as soon as your ex sees her, it's going to lead to an argument. That kind of nonsense.
That's bad.
Yeah. I always say people are stupid. My wife always thought I was just being crotchety when I said it, but now she said, "Yeah, I think you're right. People are stupid."
So how did you feel? You obviously retired. What was it like the next day? How did you feel when there was no going to work anymore?
Exciting would be the word, because I didn't know what was coming next. And the way it's worked out is exactly what I thought, because I came out with plans to do a certain project. So what I was going to do, and I still may do this, it's not dead in the water, I'm still exploring it, going into businesses and doing training days for staff. So I would give them, so specifically around problem solving and decision making and teamwork and critical thinking, but in a scenario where it's a murder-based scenario. So they're having the fun of, or I'm a murder investigator and we're doing murder investigating, but at the same time they're learning core skills that they could take into their everyday workplace. So that was the idea I came out with. So I started along those lines, and everything I'd read around, if you want to position yourself as an expert, is to write a book. So, which is what I did. Started to write a book, and the idea being that the book would translate to the business, and it would be a calling card type thing. So this is what I would teach our staff, and this is the basis of it. But the book wasn't working. It was trying to be 2 different things. It was like, this is what we do in the police, and this is how it help your business. So I decided I'd split them, and I'd write 2 books. This is what we do in the police, and this is how it can relate to business. So the first book was, this is what we do in the police. And what I realised was, actually, who am I writing this for? You got to know who you're writing a book for. But who's going to be most interested in what we do in the police? It would be true crime fans. And not just true crimes. In fact, my idea, who I was writing to, this might sound snobby, I don't know. I'm writing to an intelligent true crime fan. I'm writing to a fan that wants to understand the processes, doesn't want to be titillated by the more you know what I mean, the sensationalizing the crimes. That's not what that's not what I would ever do. It's not what I've done, and I would never do. Everything I've done is about, for that true crime fan that's got an intellectual, what's the word, interest, or in the actual processes that the police do, not the gory side. Or so that's who I was writing it to, and it's kind of dragged me down a route I wasn't expecting, to the point where I've got a TV show starting on the 20th of March, which is just a million miles away from what I was planning to do, but kind of things have just sort of, one thing has led on to another. And Dawn, I'll be a little bit honest, I'm a little bit lazy at heart, and I often take the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance has taken me to the point where it was actually where we met in Glasgow, in CrimeCon Glasgow. I was talking, and I was on a stage with Colin Sutton, Shaham Daz. I was conscious of the fact I was on stage with people that the audience would know, and they'd be like, "Who's this fella?" So I thought I better introduce myself and lay the groundwork. So I explained what my book was and what it was about. Little did I know that in the audience was the lady from back then it was called CBS Reality, now it's called True Crime, the TV channel, who commissioned the programs. And outside, she approached me. She said, "I heard you describing your book, and it sounds like quite interesting. I think it could translate to a TV show." I thought, that sounds interesting. And she said, well, we should get together and have a coffee. And I've learned in this industry, I'm doing bunny ears now, but this industry I'm in, you get a lot of people say to you, "Oh, this sounds interesting. What about this, that, the other?" And it never materializes. So I didn't really expect anything to happen, but she contacted me, and we sat and we went out, we had a coffee, and almost a year to the day from that CrimeCon meeting, we were filming our TV show, and it was a really bizarre way. And normally, I've done this a couple of times since, is what would normally happen is a TV production company would pitch a TV channel with an idea, but this was the other way around. It was a TV company that was said, "Well, we'll do it." So we ended up having the production companies pitching their ideas for the sort of the nuance of the TV show. And we picked one, a TV production company called Phoenix, and they've been brilliant. And I saw the first episode the other day. We had a family screening, and I like it. Hopefully my family liked it, but then they would do. They wouldn't say it was rubbish, would they?
Tell me what it's like then. What was the premise of it?
So the idea is it's almost an extension of the book. So it's to give people an understanding of what it's really like to investigate murders. And so each episode features a case, a murder. And I sit down I don't turn horrible on them, but I sit down interviewing face to face in a relaxed way with one of the lead investigators on the murder, and trying to get an understanding of, well, quite often what you see when particularly high profile cases, you might get at the beginning, you might be a bit of news, and you might see a senior detective coming on appealing for information, witnesses and whatnot, and the next time you might see them is outside on the steps of the court thanking the jury for the conviction. Loads has gone on in between. So much has gone on in between, and it's not all plain sailing. There's be ups and downs. So the idea is that we get behind the story, get behind, well, what was the investigation? What was going wrong? What went right? How did you feel? How were you feeling at the time? And that's the central basis of the program. But at the same time, we have family members come on, experts, potential people, other people involved in the case, to tell the story. We don't have a narrator. Everything's told from the perspective of the people involved. And the only case that was one of the ones that I was involved in is the very first one. And we do that consciously. I don't tend to talk about the cases that I investigated, but this one, I felt it would be better to start the season with, well, this is what I've done, so you understand me as a person and what I've done. So we deal with one of the cases that really will always stay with me. an EastEnders actress by the name of Cyan Blake, spelt Sian, but she used to pronounce it Cyan, and she was murdered along with her two boys and buried in the garden by her husband. And it's one of those cases that will always stay with me. And it was, if I was going to pick one that I wanted to demonstrate me as a detective and what I've done and what's ultimately what's important to me. And child murders were the ones that always affected me the most. So we started with that one, and all the others that follow will be me talking and getting to understand from the detective what they did. But this is me sitting down with one of my colleagues and we talk about it. And there's actually 4 from our murder team that tell the story of our investigation.
I like the sound of it. I mean, I loved your book. I thought your book was brilliant.
Thank you.
And some of the fact, the what did you call them? The myth busters.
Oh, yeah.
Oh wow, that just blew my mind. Some of them. So I'm looking forward to watching that.
And then each episode has got me talking to camera, trying to give a bit of knowledge. Again, it's all share. For everything I've done since I've left is about sharing knowledge around murder. So I'll to my pieces to camera, not so much on the first one, but on the later ones, will be putting a bit of context to some of the police procedure and explaining why we do things or why we don't do things, or that kind of thing.
Have you got any other ideas for books, or are you
I'm
stopping
stopping
at
at 2.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh no, but you're so good at it.
I appreciate that,
really,
Dawn.
really good.
That's very kind. But writing books is really hard. It takes a lot of work. So the second one I did was basically a year of the research, the writing, and it is hard work, and I don't feel I can do it again. I've done it twice. I feel I've done my all in terms of books, and it's TV at the moment, which I'm sort of putting my efforts into, and also putting together some. I'm doing some online courses for crime writers. I'm trying to think of other ways of sort of sharing that knowledge around murder, which is essentially what everything I'm doing. That's what it's about. I know you've read my book, Dawn, but other people that haven't. I took a conscious decision. It was important to me that I don't name the cases, and so everything when I'm writing my book, I'm explaining procedure, and I try and relate it to a case I've dealt with, but I don't use a victim's name or a suspect's name, and that was a conscious decision that was important to me, because I don't want to be seen to be ultimately a book is a transaction of cash. Someone's buying my book for the knowledge I have around murder, and I felt uncomfortable doing that using the victims' names. So that's why I don't do that. And for the program, what was very important is that via the family liaison officer, we approached Cyan's family and explained, given the option if they wanted to be part of it, but explain what we're doing. And if they turn around and said, "Oh, we're not comfortable with that," I wouldn't have done it. So that's really important to me. And so for instance, CrimeCon, I get involved with CrimeCon. CrimeCon is very victim focused. Every podcast I've been on, bar one, and I won't mention which one that is. So it was very early on. One of the interviews I did. Everyone I'm involved with, I feel that they're in it for the right reasons, and they're more victim focused, and that's really important to me.
When you caution somebody in England, can you give me the whole caution arrest thing?
Yeah. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention and question something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Yay! That's it. Then you retired. You were free of that desk. I know how you didn't like being on the desk for the last 5 years, but did you miss it? Not necessarily that job, but being in the police. No.
When I retired, I was ready to go. To this day, I don't miss it. I miss the people that I work, some of the people that I work with, but the job itself, I don't miss it all. It's a different time now, with the cameras and all that stuff, and people, since George Floyd, it's changed a lot, and I just don't have the patience to deal with the stuff that these guys have to deal with nowadays. I've been retired now for almost 11 years, and I can honestly say I don't miss it one bit.
So what have you been doing in that 11 years? Tell me about your business.
Yeah, I mean, since then, I've been running the business. When I retired, I bought another business that didn't make it. My wife and I, we just try to do as much traveling as we can, and we still run the business, as I said, and my wife still works as a nurse. Our kids are now grown and moved out, and, my oldest has her own family now. But, in addition to that, I needed something to keep my brain working. So back in 2020, I started a podcast, and it was the Off Duty podcast. And I didn't know what I was doing when I started. I just knew that I was listening to podcasts. I just got into listening to podcasts, and I thought it was something really cool. And I started looking around, and I started listening to other law enforcement and first responder podcasts. But to me, they all started sounding the same. So I wanted to do something different. And, that's what my podcast was. It was out, there's that term out there, humanizing the badge. I like to say my tagline was turning cops into people. It was different. If you listen to the podcast, it was definitely not like your typical law enforcement. I mean, we didn't talk politics or policies. It came up from time to time, but I always tried to keep the focus on the individual outside of the uniform. And, I had different segments that I did with the podcast. The first part of it was just trying to learn why that individual got into law enforcement, some of the things that they were doing while they were in their career. Then probably my favorite segment was what I call dig deeper. And that's where I would just ask questions that people don't get asked every day, especially in law enforcement. It was just things that most people don't get asked on a day-to-day basis. And people loved it, and with Dig Deeper, I would usually go into people's social media and I would graph posts and I would craft questions around the post and things like that. And that's where the Dig Deeper came from. And it was just, I just enjoyed doing it, but I got burned out because I think I did 148, 150 episodes. Plus I had a couple of other podcasts that I was doing. None were as big as that one. That podcast really did become really big in the law enforcement niche. I had a lot of people that really would, reach out to me and tell me how much they really enjoyed the podcast because it was different. I have to admit, it was not like any other law enforcement podcast out there. And in May of 23, I just got burned out from it. Because it's a lot. I mean, just to do an hour episode, you're looking at about 10 hours of work. By the time you find a guest, research the guest, put the questions together, edit, all of that stuff, it's a lot, and I just got burned out, and I hadn't put out a new episode since May of 2023. And I've had a number of people reach out to me asking me to please bring it back. Because they missed it. And I mean, one guy actually got mad at me because I stopped doing it, but I've been playing with the idea of bringing it back, but I think I'm going to do another podcast, but I think I'm going to do something different. As I don't know if you can see over my shoulder here, my golf clubs back there. I'm a big golf nut. So I'm thinking about doing something in that arena. And I've kind of been toying with the idea of doing a golf-related show that caters to first responders that play golf. So
that's very niche.
I don't know what. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but I know a lot of officers that I know play golf. So I'm still trying to come up with the concept for the show. If I decide to go that, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but that's just one of the ideas that I'm just toying with. But, I really enjoy podcasting a lot, and I miss doing it. So I'm definitely going to do something again. I just don't know what that is. And the Off Duty podcast, all the episodes are still out. So if anybody wants to go listen to it, all 150 episodes are there. You can go on and binge listen to them. And you can hear my progression as I went from the first episode up until I ended it. how the show changed, and I really thought it was a good podcast, a good platform. I think a lot of people really enjoyed it. At least I hope they did.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed listening to it as well. What was your favourite person that you had on that maybe surprised you? Maybe you thought maybe you knew what they were going to say, but they said something different.
There was one episode I did, and I'm sorry I can't remember the gentleman's name, but a lot of times I would have officers on that were dealing with some type of mental health issues at some point in their career, depression and things like that. And I had a gentleman on, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was probably one of my favorite episodes. And it was funny because I barely said a word. And that wasn't by accident. That wasn't intentional. We had a technical problem.
Oh, no, really?
Yes.
That happens, does it?
Where we were doing the interview and he was telling his story, and something happened where he couldn't hear me anymore. So he kept talking and talking and talking. But his story was so good. I'm glad I didn't interrupt him. And that turned out to be one of my biggest episodes.
One last question. You had 2 UK police officers on. Was there anything in these episodes that you were surprised to learn what happens in the UK compared to America, or anything they said that was surprising, or was it all kind of normal?
No, I think law enforcement across the world, take the politics out of it, I think we're all the same. A lot of us get into this to make a difference. It may not start out that way, especially like in my case, but once I got into it, I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the difference in the people that I was able to have a positive effect on. And I think no matter where you're at in the world in law enforcement, and I'm not talking about some of the small third world countries where things are corrupt and things like that, but in a normal society that has law enforcement, I think we're all pretty much the same. We may have different methods and things that we have to deal with in terms of policies and stuff like that, but at the root of it, I think we're all just here to try to make a difference in our own little way. And I don't think there's much difference. You know, I've had a number of officers. On my podcast, I've had officers from Canada, New Zealand, I can't remember the other countries that have come on. And I realized, you know, it's pretty much no difference. You know, we may do things a little bit different, but at the root of it, it's all pretty much the same.
Well, that's just ruined the whole premise of my podcast then. Cheers.
No, I mean, you know, like I said, there's a lot of nuances there that you can get into, but at the base, where we start, I think it's that core is the same. Now, if you want to get into the different tactics and policies and all of that kind of stuff, yeah, that's going to be that's not only just different internationally, but that's different from municipality to municipality here in the States, you know. So, and I think a lot of it has to do with the political world that that your municipality or your department is in, the leadership of that department, you know, and their agendas and things like that, because all that stuff trickles down, and it's different, but it's the same.
Yeah, good backtrack. I'm teasing. Is it the Miranda
rights? Mm-hmm.
Do you remember it? Can you say it to me?
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you decide to give up your rights to an attorney, I'm totally lost after that. You know what? In my career, I think I've read Miranda rights to someone maybe 3 times. I think it's maybe 3 times, and that's stretching it.
That's good.
Yeah.
You worded well then.
Yeah, and even then, I didn't memorize it because I didn't want to mess it up. If I had a piece of paper that I read off of it.
Okay.
Yeah, if I had a prisoner that was in custody that I had to interview, I would read it off to them and I would have them sign it. So I never really memorized it, because when you're on patrol, there's no reason to.
Okay.
So, because you're entitled to ask questions as part of your investigation. So there's really no reason to at that point. I had a recruit that started doing, I'm like, what are you doing? Stop.
You don't need to.
No, we don't do that out here.
But the politics around police is far more intense now.
The basic function of police work is the same, but there's so many other variables involved in it right now. I know for me, when I was working, at least twice a week, my gun was coming out.
I never carried a gun in my 30 years. Never once.
Are you serious?
I've never fired one. Never fired one. Never carried a gun.
Really?